This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the August 9th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you live from the Little House by the East Side Rec in Saratoga Springs, New York. We have the usual crew on hand today, sitting across my kitchen table, Jonathon Kinchen. Jonathon, how are you today?
Oh, I'm struggling a little bit. Pete drugged me out for a run after he so graciously introduced the rum in milkshake combination at the Shake Shack, which I have partaken in every day since I've been here.
Yeah, you gotta be a big boy to get that. You gotta be a big boy to get that rum in the milkshake situation sorted out. There were clockers present on our run this morning. Former listed stakes quality horse Jonathon Kinchen coming off a layoff. I'd give him about a C-. Peter Thomas Fornatale, basically hard-knocking, 10-claimer. But, judged on his own scale, pretty good today. I'd go B-. We did have a grade 1 caliber athlete staying in the Little House on the East Side Rec. We're going to hear from him a little later in the show. He's Hawthorne Contest ambassador Eric Bialek. He scratched from the workout this morning. Basically, my theory is he didn't want to waste a workout on a couple of old lugs like us. Also joining us today from the DRF offices in New York City, we have podcast co-host at DRF Formulator, Mike Hogan. Mike, what's going on down in New York?
Just trying to find a place to sit. They're in the midst of remodeling the DRF offices, so it's a little bit of chaos. So I'm holed up in a quiet conference room. Hopefully, all will go well.
What am I missing? Are they combining floors? What's the exact situation down there?
No, they're just making our floor a little better. They're making more offices. I think it's been years since they've really done anything. I think they're installing, sprinklers in case, somebody bursts into flames. I don't know. Just things like that to kind of get things up to code and bring it into the 21st century.
Got you. Well, it is sales week here in Saratoga Springs. This, for me, annually is one of my absolute favorite weeks. Travers Week is great, but the thing about Travers Week is there's this impending sense of the coming denouement. It's always a little bit sad because it's basically Travers, and the last week is great, but the last week it's over and everybody knows it's over. Whereas early in the meet, you have one of the meeting's other signature races, the Whitney, to kick off this amazing stretch that goes Whitney, Sales, and then Contest. Oh, and by the way, Whitney always coincides with my birthday, so we find a way to throw down. This year, brewed about 15 gallons of beer. We've drank about 10 of those gallons already. We have another 5 remaining in cold storage for later in the summer. We had the great chef Dan Spitz, who is available for all of your Saratoga catering needs, by the way. We had him fire up the pizza oven. We had a few pies out in the back the other night. Great guests from inside and outside of racing. Was particularly tickled to have some friends of the podcast stop by. Al Ford, Chris Garofolo, his friend Ian. It was a good crew of folks. Jonathon, did you eat or drink too much the other night?
I think a combination of all of those things. I know that I was that guy at the party who fell asleep on the couch, and the party was happening and surrounding me, but hey, I was back at it the next morning, ready to rock and roll.
Did you wake up with any marker on your face? That's the question.
We should have made him suffer that fate, actually.
You know what that means? That means your friends really like you, Jonathon.
We've gone over the paddock scratch. We've gone over the Van off. We need a new designation for fell asleep in the middle of the party. Any ideas?
I don't know. I'll think of something before the end of the show. But there's definitely a case to be made there.
Maybe loomed, failed to fire. I don't know. Lagged.
So we did make it over to the sales briefly last night. What were your impressions? Do you enjoy going over there? There's some racing fans love the sales, look forward to it every year. Others wouldn't go there, if prodded with a 10-foot pole. Where do you stand on the whole sales situation, JK?
Well, I think it's very simple. If you're a person who doesn't like crowds, you don't like the Kentucky Derby because of the crowd. It's a crowded situation. It's warm outside, and there's people everywhere, and it's hard to kind of get a seat, get a drink. find your space. But it's really exciting to see people spending the type of money that they're spending on the future of our sport. And then looking through the sales book, when you look up and you see a random hip up there that went for 700,000, and you look down and you see that the horse is a half the songbird, it's exciting to kind of see those things happen and to kind of follow it. So I like it. I'll go by tonight for sure again. And I look forward to it next year as well.
In the history of the podcast, we've had a lot of weird random noises in the background. This might be the best. You were just hearing Muggs, the handicapping Labrador, rattle her chain and knock her water bowl. She looked the best of anybody on the training run this morning. I'm going to take care of that quickly and ask Mike Hogan what his impressions of the big race at Saratoga, the Whitney, were over the weekend. What'd you think of Frostin's return to the races, Mike?
It was pretty good. It was pretty good. But before we even really talk about the Whitney, let's mention a little bit of the test and Paola Queen. Prior to the Whitney in the winner's circle, they had, in addition to it being Pete's birthday, it was also Mary Lou Whitney's birthday. They had a little cake for her in the winner's circle. And I'm sitting there watching the whole thing thinking, geez, I talked to Jonathon. He's on the plane on the way to Saratoga, and he tells me, I think Paola Queen's going to run a big one. If I know Jonathon well, Jonathon probably has more money now than Mary Lou Whitney does.
What happened there, JK?
See, if you know Jonathon well, you would know that Jonathon found a way to botch that.
Oh, no, you're kidding.
I used in the pick six. I went 5 of 6 in the pick. Everyone went 5 of 6 in the pick six, right? But I went 5 of 6 in the pick six the right way with that horse. Everyone else didn't have the horse. So that was a little bit frustrating. I had it queued up to bet the exacta, and the track distractions kind of got in the way, and I missed betting it. I wasn't going to be anything life-changing, but it would have been helpful. So, frustrating. Got a lot of really nice tweets about it, though. And for the chalk eater that I am, it's been a pretty good run on the podcast the last 2 weeks with her and Lauban.
Yeah, I got slid into by somebody who's like, you're always calling Jonathon a chalk sucker. You're so mean to him. He gives out Lauban. He gives out Paola Queen. What have you ever done? That kind of thing. You know, they're kind of right. I got to take one on the chin here. It was some very impressive picking and a creative long shot case made not only here on the podcast via Mike, thank you for having done that, Mike, but also in our little seminar over at the Pavilion tent in the grandstand. There were a lot of happy people as a result of Jonathon giving out that horse. Just want to mention quickly, just a little programming note, we will be once again on Saturday doing a seminar at 11 a.m. on the grounds at Saratoga. Special guests include Steve Davidowitz, going to be talking about the new book, Cashing on Big Days, very appropriate given that it'll be Arlington Million Day. We're also going to have Nick Tamaro as a special guest, and once again, becoming the stalwart of these seminars in Saratoga, our friend Travis Stone. So if you're in Saratoga, please come join us. If you're not in Saratoga, you can follow along on Periscope. Before we leave the topic of Paola Queen, we did have a Twitter question from our Twitter pal Ryan Olston, who wanted to know, Jonathon, just very simply, if you could make the case for the podcast listeners as to why you liked Paola Queen in that spot.
She reminded me a little bit of one of my favorite horses of all time, and one of the horses that helped me kind of get to a score that allowed me to start playing this game a little bit more seriously, and that's Champagne Doro. A horse that's shown speed going longer, kind of on the Kentucky Oaks trail, and now they're going to be cutting that horse back, and you can expect that the horse can improve a little bit. Obviously had some talent. The connections thought that the Kentucky Oaks was an appropriate route. The other thing that I've talked about on the show before is that if you can get the DRF Clocker report and look to see who horses are working with, it will often give you a clue. And that horse was working with a horse named Linda Mimi the day before. And when I actually told Mike that I liked the horse, it was before Linda Mimi ran on Friday and won by open lengths. And so Saturday morning, I felt a little bit more confident moving forward with Paola Queen, possibly being a live runner there. So whenever you have a chance to look at those workout reports, always take a look to see who the horses are working with. I think it can give you some pretty big clues.
That's a good case for a long shot there, Jonathon. Let me ask you this. I would have thought that if there was a path to victory, that path to victory would have been on the lead. When Paola Queen was not among the early leaders, did you lose all confidence in that bet, or is it the kind of thing where when you're betting a horse at that price, you're still okay with the position you're in?
No, I've got no problem admitting that my heavy key there was Lightstream. So the entire race, my eyes were on Lightstream. She ducked down inside, and to be honest, Lightstream would have been a much better result for me. But like we always do on the pod, like we've talked about before, if I can give you a winner, I'll give you a winner. That's great. But more importantly, and how I feel like when I used to listen to these things all the time, when I listened to Steve Vick all the time, I learned new angles to look at that made me a better player. And so I continue to try to hope to get the same things from that and hope that people can get that from us as well. And that's simply what it was by pointing out a horse like that.
I think that's a great point, and I'm I think a lot of listeners appreciate those insights. And I think folks understand the difference between a contest-type horse or a long shot to key in the gimmicks who's going to really juice the number should the horse come in, as opposed to a horse you're going to absolutely look to build your day around. Any final thoughts on the test from you, Jonathon, before we move back to Mike for his thoughts on those big stakes from Saratoga on Saturday?
No, I think it was a great race. Unfortunately, I don't think any of those fillies want to see the lights of Karina Mia cutting back, so they better enjoy their graded stakes placings while they can, because I feel like when she gets back running around one turn, she's going to be virtually impossible to stop.
That sounds like a pretty logical analysis to me, especially given what happened when she tried to go long against Songbird. What did you think of the race, Mike?
It's the kind of race where I think from a pace standpoint, it completely fell apart and really set it up for any horse to come rallying from off the pace. I think Jonathon, and when I was watching it, I thought it was going to be Lightstream. She ran well, but yeah, Paola Queen is the one that ended up picking up the pieces at a huge price. The horse that you'd want to bet back is one who I think ran really well against that strong pace and held on for third, which would be Off the Tracks, who I was against in the race, partly because I didn't think it would set up all that well for her. And while she didn't win, I felt like she ran maybe the best race of the bunch.
It's an interesting thing. Now, for me to answer that question, I wish I'd done a little bit more work. It's so hard up here with the 6 days of racing, especially on sales day. I haven't gone back and carefully examined the pace. My inclination watching it live, without, again, paying all that much attention in a very distracting day, was that it looked like Lightstream was a classic move into hot pace trip horse who I'll typically prefer even over those horses who cut out that pace early, though I agree both are potential upgrades if the pace is what I think it was. Jonathon, of those two, which one would you want to have out of the race?
Oh, I mean, I'll be honest. I don't think I really want any of them based on what races they're gonna probably end up running in next. I was against Off the Tracks. I thought Off the Tracks was with the track at the race at Belmont, so I didn't want anything to do with her on Saturday. And she did. She ran well. She's just not one that I'd be running to the windows to bet moving forward. I mean, unless she gets ignored, but she's Todd Pletcher. She's already won a stakes race this summer. Feels like she's always going to kind of get a little bit of money, and I feel like I'll always be in a position to want to try to beat her with someone else.
And in terms of coming back with Lightstream?
I was really unimpressed. I didn't feel like she really had an excuse, and she wouldn't switch leads, and we'll see. It just depends. It's all one of those things. If she comes back in a race and she's 4-5 off of that performance, and I'm going to fade her and try to look somewhere else. But if I can slide in and find her somewhere else at 4 or 5-1 down the line, she'd be one I could take another look at. It's all about the value in situations like that with horses like that.
Of course. Let's move on, I think, to talk about the Whitney. What did you think of Frosted, Mike?
Frosted, Mike Watchmaker wrote an article that kind of summed it up, I thought, pretty well. Frosted keeps surprising me. I mean, I expected him to win. I didn't expect him to necessarily go to the lead so early and try and take him to wire. He looks, as he's become a 4-year-old, he's not only matured into a better horse, but he's matured into a more versatile horse. And look, I don't think that field he was beating was really that much. I don't think I want any of them in the Classic. Aside from maybe him, but I'm still ultimately, the questions about him at 10 furlongs, the questions about him outside of, or Kieran in particular, in Southern California. I liked it. I'm not convinced he is the best older horse in training in the U.S. right now. I think some people are, and it's made for at least an interesting debate.
Jonathon, what were your thoughts on Frosted?
I thought he was brilliant. I thought he ran amazing. But I don't want him going any further. You know, I don't see a way in which I would lean towards him in a matchup between him and California Chrome. California Chrome has excelled at 1.25 miles, obviously a number of times. In his race in Dubai, he probably actually ran 1.5 miles as wide as he was in that race. And the way he ran against Dortmund off of that break, I think that at 1.25 miles at Santa Anita, I would be taking California Chrome all day, every day, twice on Sunday against Frosted.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about the top of the division. But first, and I swear I'm not trolling with this question, but it came up in the seminar the other day, so I just want to, I'll put it to you, Jonathon. Travis Stone had made the case on the panel the other day that it was his gut that Frosted was probably best going a one-turn mile. Mike Watchmaker disputed that notion. You, at the time, landed more on Travis's side of that particular debate. Do you feel like there's anything in this Whitney that offers us a data point one way or the other about where Frosted does his best work in terms of how many turns and distance?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's very similar to the horse whose name won't be mentioned, that he's a good horse, and he can win two-turn races, but ultimately he will excel and exceed expectations at one turn. And and his buyer will tell the same story. I mean, no one expected him to run a whatever it was he ran in the Met Mile, a 120 whatever. But, you know, the buyer shows he ran that huge number in that one-turn race, and then he ran a really good, respectable number that he can be proud of and the barn can be proud of in a two-turn race. I think he just will excel better at one turn, but he's good enough to win top-class two-turn races.
That number was 107. I spoke to another ace figure maker in Paul Matisse who had it come back at a 109. I was thinking if you look at the amount of running he did given where he was in the pace, you could, if you wanted to, give him a little extra credit over and above that. Mike, you and I had a good conversation. I can't remember if it was on Twitter or offline heading into the day about what sort of the over-under would be for how many buyer points Frosted would regress. Do you feel like he ran about as well as you thought he would, or a little better? Where do you stand on that specific issue? I think everyone in the world knew he was going to regress. It was just a question of how much.
Yeah, I tweeted out, I mean, sort of jokingly, and, as sort of my attempt at opening the discussion as to whether or not a regression would still be enough to make him vulnerable in the Whitney. I didn't think it would, because even if he regressed 16 points, he was still much the best in that race. And I tweeted out, my prediction was he was going to regress 12 points. And even then, I probably would have taken the under. It was 16 there. But he was just so much better than the rest of the horses that he was facing. Didn't matter that he changed his running style, became a front runner in a field that seemed like it had a decent front runner in Noble Bird, who I think everybody in the world expected to go to the lead. Instead, you see Joel Rosario take Frosted kind of on his own. Seemed like he never asked him even into the stretch. I mean, it was just a horse who was toying with his rivals there. In my mind, the buyer doesn't really matter that much. Yeah, we all expected a regression. 15, 16 points seems about right. He was just, even though you have to, and the buyer team has to create it based on the beaten lengths, he was 20 points better than everybody he faced in that race.
I think when you factor in the pace, that's not a crazy supposition. Let me ask you this: an interesting, just handicapping question in general. I do want to get back into the specifics of the Classic division, but what do you do? This was probably a question I should have asked before the race, but there's a theory. I think it comes from sheet theory in handicapping that a horse like Frosted coming into a race like that, as big as the figure edge is, that it's hard to get too excited about getting too stuck into a horse who is going to regress, and that ultimately at the end of your life in aggregate, you're better off focusing on horses who are more on the upswing. Does Frosted put the lie to that idea, Jonathon, or is that concept of looking for ones cycling up as opposed to cycling down something that factors into your handicapping?
I mean, I've never been really much of a bounce guy, and I don't remember where. I don't know if Beyer wrote about it, maybe in Beyer on Speed, but it's like if the horse ran a 122, like he's not gonna run a 125. Like, of course he's gonna regress. He's naturally gonna go backwards of such a huge performance. And so I don't think it's so much that he's bouncing. He just ran really, really good, and he's going back to kind of what was normal for him, rather than it took this starch out of him or whatever. So I've never been a bounce guy. People always say to me, well, don't you think that horse is going to bounce? I always err on the side of, if the horse ran really well, and as long as all the signs, workout reports, and plan are pointing in the right direction, I'm going to expect that he's going to run that same performance, if not better. I don't expect for the negative to happen to him to move backwards. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. And, there's some of this is just, we get Eric Bialek to talk about it when he's on here, the simple concept, statistical concept of regression to the mean factors in, as opposed to a physical effort that really, as Jonathon said, takes the starch out of a horse. Mike, where do you stand? Is the bounce something that you're concerned about when you're doing your handicapping?
Not generally. I mean, I think I'm kind of with Jonathon. I don't think horses. I think there are some people that is one of the most important things when they're handicapping a race, is they expect horses to bounce. They're looking for horses to bounce. And I think maybe 20, 30, even 40 years ago, that idea was more prevalent, and that made more sense when you had horses running every 2 weeks coming off of a big effort. Now we've got trainers, we've got owners, we've got everybody focused on things like that, getting horses ready to do top efforts. I think that sort of thing where you see like absolute regression off of a huge effort, it may happen. It's not as extreme as it once was at one time. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think it's your point about regression to the mean, I think is more the case. And look, in the Met Mile, everything came together for Frosted. And, Beyer has written about it. You have horses that put together their best performances when they're in peak shape, and the race flow and everything else comes together for them. That's what happened in the Met Mile. I wouldn't expect him to move forward off that or even come close to replicating that, because it's almost like the perfect storm. Yes, he's a really good horse who put together an amazing performance, but it's kind of foolish to think that now he's going to put together that performance every time.
Another thing I want to point out, though, is I don't mean to denigrate the theory in the first place of where this stuff came from. Part of why I think the handicapping world today is the way that both Mike and Jonathon are saying, is the power of sort of sheet theory in general, and the fact that you have top trainers now who will plot their horses' campaigns based on some of those theories espoused by Mr. Ragozin back in the day. So it's not like I'm saying those ideas aren't valid. It's just we're trying to look at them in the context of handicapping in today's world. All right, before we move on from this, I do want to talk about that essential question and put that back on Mike. Jonathon said before he wants California Chrome over Frosted every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Where do you stand on the question of who you like better between those two? And let's make it a harder question by saying, what if I know it's not going to happen, but what if the Breeders' Cup this year were run at Belmont Park? Where would you stand on the difference between those two?
Well, I think you're sort of putting words in Jonathan's mouth, because remember, he said at 10 furlongs in Southern California.
Fair.
So with those being the criteria, I would say absolutely I'm with Jonathon, and I might even say I'd prefer perhaps Dortmund over Frosted. But if you move things to New York, then it's a different ballgame. I mean, it's on Frosted's home court. I think the playing field is a much more even playing field. You've got a surface that Frosted obviously loves, and then it's much more of a toss-up. But like you said, that's probably not going to happen. I doubt you'll see. I would imagine you'll see Frosted, and I haven't seen exactly where they're mapping. I'm guessing he's going to go Woodward, Jockey Club Gold Cup, BC Classic. Jockey Club Gold Cup being, okay, let's see if he can get the 10 furlongs before we take him out to Southern California. It would be amazing, but I doubt we'll see California Chrome show up there because, like, in a way, that would be almost more of the marquee matchup than the Breeders' Cup.
So all you're going to give me, Mike, you're absolutely right about my putting words in Jonathan's mouth, but I got to give you a hard time back. You didn't answer the question. I mean, it's a toss-up.
I didn't.
Get off that fence.
I didn't.
Get off that
No,
fence.
I don't know. Why do I have to? I mean, it's not like they're going to be running against each other. It's not like I can put real money down to back up this opinion, So why do I have to put my foot down and pick one over the other? But no, I mean, I'm kind of kidding. I mean, ultimately, I would take California Chrome, all things being equal. They faced each other in Dubai on a neutral court. California Chrome was much the best over Frosted. Yeah, Frosted maybe has gotten a little better since he's come back here, but I haven't seen enough to convince me that he has improved enough to beat California Chrome, especially California Chrome's home court, or even in a neutral court again. I'll take him every day of the week against Frosted, especially at 10 furlongs. And look, I'll say this. He looked really good beating up on Comfort and beating up on Noble Bird and even FNX, who is a good horse, but isn't really, in my opinion, one of the top older horses. I'll be surprised if he does that against California Chrome.
Let's get back to my putting words in Jonathan's mouth. I was just sort of assuming that your statement was more of a blanket one. You did, as Mike pointed out, put in the qualifier of the 10 furlongs in California. Is there a circumstance where you would bet Frosted over California Chrome that you can easily envision?
No, I mean, I'm actually going to piggyback Mike's point about Dortmund. One of the races in the last 5 years I'm so mad we didn't get to see was Dortmund running in the Malibu, the 7 furlong race at the beginning of the year at Santa Anita against Run Happy, because as my friend Nick Tamro pointed out, I think Dortmund is going to be an unbelievable one-turn horse because of how big he is, and once he really gets going at one turn, he's going to be phenomenal. And so if they went one turn a mile, the kind of one-turn mile and a quarter at Belmont, I'd be looking to take Dortmund in that situation. So to agree with Mike, but no, I want California Chrome. I think he's an exceptional horse. I think that based on his pedigree and kind of hanging out here at this sale and seeing all of these pedigrees running around and talks, there's no real value for him, I think, in the breeding shed yet. And so I think they're going to just keep racing him, and I think they're going to make a real strong run at this new World Triple Crown. They're going to try to win the Classic. They're going to try to win the Pegasus. And they're going to try to win the Dubai World Cup. And I think that we're in for a ride if this horse can be as special and keep rolling as we all hope and think he can.
Very, very interesting points about that runner. What is going on with the scheduling for Dortmund? Is he Pack Classic next?
As far as I know, yeah, Mike.
Mm-hmm. I think so. That's what I've heard.
And
I guess the biggest question is what's going to happen with the female version of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Mandela's still on the fence, and he hasn't ruled it out yet. But that would be exciting. I mean, that would be great to see the three of them run against each other. I know Melatonin is out. I've heard that he's sick. So,
talking about Beholder, of course, be very interesting to see what the plan is going forward. I'd like to see the aggressive plan stuck with. And for me, a trainer like Mandela, who is so public about a plan like that, we've talked about this before in the show, when especially trainers who typically train with a big plan, they come out and they say, this is what the schedule is going to be, and then that schedule changes. For me, it's just never a good thing. I think back to Palace Malice, who I remember we talked about on the pod, when they did that sort of unusual thing at the beginning of last year and mapped out the whole schedule for the year, and then when they deviate from it, come back in the lesser spot, somehow they don't tend to win when they come back in that lesser spot. So I'd be a little bit afraid if that doesn't happen for Beholder, but we'll see. She's so great. A bounce back wouldn't surprise me. What a cool race that will be in just a couple weeks' time now. That's August 20th, is that right, the Classic?
Oh, boy, is it? Is it that quick? Yeah, you might be right.
I think it's very soon. So, all right. We have plenty of time left on the show. We do have a guest coming in a little bit. Seems
I
like
wanted
our
to...
technology's holding together. Mike, where should we go from here?
I wanted to talk about one past thing from this weekend, and then some news that broke this morning about a future race. First, let's look into the past. Did either of you guys happen to watch? I know we talked about it a little bit on the podcast on Friday. Did either of you guys happen to watch the West Virginia Derby?
Absolutely.
I did.
So, Jonathan, you mentioned California Chrome running a mile and a half in Dubai in the 10 furlong race. How far did Cupid run when he ran the 9 furlong West Virginia Derby? Mike Watchmaker, of course, early in the card was mentioning how bad the rail was at Mountaineer. Obviously, Rafael Bejarano was listening.
Yeah, the thing about that,
half the whole way around.
Right. The thing about that place is on Monday or Tuesday nights. Sometimes I'll play in these little feeders, and they happen to be Mountaineer, and the rail is dead almost every night there.
Yeah.
And it's very often that you see horses like literally in the 7 path the entire race, and they keep running. It's the trickiest thing in the world. And Pete and I actually had a disagreement about this. He thought, I'll let him say what he thought. I thought Cupid was being kind of silly because he was confused being so far out in the middle of the track. He kept flipping leads because they train near and on the rail, especially a speed horse like that. You have a horse 7 to 7 path. I think it can be a little bit confusing for them.
I think that's a good point. My initial thought was that it was really ugly, and I understood the point of being that far out and the dead rail. But between the flipping leads back and forth, and I thought it just didn't look. His action just didn't look smooth. I was not impressed. But I think Jonathan makes an excellent point, and I've heard other excellent race watchers agree with his view that it was more a case of this is a horse who's used to kind of doing one thing, being asked to do something radically different during the running of a race, and so I'm hedging my bet now. But visually, it wasn't the kind of race that I was in a huge hurry to bet the horse the next time from. I'll still maintain that. But perhaps my initial visceral negative reaction was a little severe. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't the prettiest of efforts, and I didn't really bet the race. I thought if that happened, I thought it was possible. On the podcast I was mentioning, I was hoping that there was other speed, and I thought he might be vulnerable from the rail, knowing that things aren't necessarily the greatest on the rail at Mountaineer. But Bejarano rode him well. I mean, as soon as he could, he got him out into the 3-4 path in the first turn, and then midway through the race, even though he looked a little goofy with the leads, he just looked like a much better horse than that field. I mean, you're right, all things being equal, if he's facing perhaps better horses, he's one that I don't know if I can trust. But it was a good effort, and the buyer came back in 95. That puts him squarely in the conversation with this relatively wide open 3-year-old colt division now.
I think the writing's kind of on the wall. If Baffert running the horse in the West Virginia Derby, he's a second stringer for him.
Yeah.
Obviously, he wants to pick up a check. It's a Coolmore horse, so it's not like they need money. You know what I mean? It's like it's not like they're out there trying to pay the bills. And Baffert, you got to get us a check. I mean, they're trying to build stallions and make champions, and so it feels like he's probably a second stringer.
Yeah, it's clear he prefers American Freedom for sure.
Let's talk about this idea for a second. I mean, to me, by this point in the year, this actually will lead into a question that we got from a listener about Nyquist. But for me, at this point in the year, 95. I mean, maybe you give him extra credit for all the ground loss and everything, but boy, yeah, that doesn't do much. I mean, a 3-year-old should be improving their speed figures as the year gets on and they get more physically mature. So I think that we're all in agreement about that second string issue. The question that we got in was about Nyquist. I didn't see this report, but somebody was saying that there was a story going around about the horse was having some sort of growing issue, growing into the frame and trying to look
growth spurt.
Growth spurt, and they were trying to use that as an excuse for the dull Haskell effort. I have a little bit of a theory on it. I couldn't answer it in 140 characters, so I figured we'd talk about it on here. But before I continue to spout off on it. Mike, it sounds like you're familiar with the story. Can you give a few more details about it and give your opinion on if this is something that would maybe make you interested in betting Nyquist again down the line?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know about as much as I just said, which is that that Doug O'Neill and the camp think he's going through a little bit of a growth spurt right now. I don't know what that means for his future plans. I don't know. And boy, I'm not a horse trainer. I don't know if that means you back off and let the horse grow a little bit and grow into their frame and ease off on training, or if you double down and, run hard to build muscle. I have no idea, frankly. So I don't really know where to go with it. I think I would just pay extra special attention to the workouts and just get a sense of what they think it means as he comes through this growth spurt.
Ironically enough, yesterday I was fortunate enough, Eric and I got to go hang out at the sale in the morning with a friend of ours who's going to be buying horses, and we got to hang out with Angel Cordero, and I got to talk to him about Uncle Mo, who actually galloped Uncle Mo for his first time that he galloped. And he pointed out that Uncle Mo had a really big growth spurt late and turned into the monster that we were fortunate enough to see at Coolmore, who was doing well last night at the sale, by the way. But so that's interesting that a son of him is experiencing something similar to that. With that said, hocus pocus, like get the horse off the rail, get him a fast track, and get him a fair pace, and maybe that can kind of help him out a little bit, and we'll let the growth thing not be much of an issue.
That's great. I do agree that Uncle Mo, unbelievable difference when we went to see him back in April compared to what he looked like physically when he was competing. And so more than most horses, I would buy that idea. I would like to see some other evidence of further development. Again, I mentioned it before he ran. I sometimes a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, and seeing that first work back, to me, I just wasn't sure. Obviously, he just needed the work. He was coming off a layoff. But there's just sometimes, for me, horse physicality stuff, I just get this. I said it before about watching that Cupid race. I'll just have sort of like a visceral reaction to what I see that makes me either really want to bet a horse in the future or maybe not so much want to bet a horse in the future. That's probably still where I am with Nyquist. I probably want him to prove me wrong. But it, again, as we always say, it all depends on the specifics of the spot and where the horse comes back. Mike, did you have anything further on this, or did you it seemed like you had another thing we should table for discussion? If not,
well, there was news that broke this morning about the next race for Tepin. Did you guys see that?
Is it not the Boston Spa?
It's not the Boston Spa.
I predicted that last night.
Oh yeah.
They're not that they're dodging. There's no reason to run against Lady Eli. They're not now. She's obviously got a little thing. She's trying to kind of get caught up on her energy after the big race in the ship. Let's give her some time. We'll run her at Keelan. Is that the guess?
No.
Okay. You got it. Go ahead.
No. I'll this is my hint. I retweeted Dave Grenning and said, that Mark Cassie guy is pretty good there.
The Woodbine Mile.
Yeah, that's right.
I think I might be there. I think there's some rumors that there might be. I'm not sure if it's official yet, so I'm talking out of school. So anybody listening to the podcast, don't tweet this. Don't tell anybody. This is just for us. It sounds like Woodbine are doing a live bankroll contest associated with that big day of racing. So start thinking about your travel plans.
And I would imagine that the rules are going to be very horse player friendly because Tommy Massis is extremely involved in kind of helping them develop how it's going to go down, like the rules and how much you have to bet and what races and blah, 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 blah. And so I think it'll be very forward-thinking type of an event if they can get it pulled together.
Speaking of that lunatic, is he making good on his threat to come in for the Saratoga contest this year? He's been ripping it up. His racing partnership, Calico Stable, has won, 2 races in the last couple of weeks. I got to think he's feeling fat. Maybe he's going to be making an appearance at Albany Airport, grabbing random handicappers behinds as he makes his way to Saratoga.
I hope so. The world's a better place when Tommy Massis is in it.
Well, that's great news, Mike. Very, very interesting, and certainly something that my interest of going up to that Woodbine contest was already at an 8, and now it goes up to a 10.
I'll tell you this. I'm a little bit interested to see how obviously she handled this straight with no problem. She handled 2 turns with no problem. So I don't think that this 1-turn mile is going to throw her any loops, but it's obviously something to think about.
I guess she has never run at Woodbine, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh, boy, I don't know.
It is a question. Does it give you any pause, Mike?
It would if it wasn't for the fact that her trainer does pretty well there and can get a good horse to run on that course. So not so much.
There is an interesting area for study. People think, whether it's baseball statistics or horse racing, there'll be some people out there that tell you, so much has already been done, blah, blah, there's not new frontiers. I don't buy it for 1 second. Here's my area of study for somebody listening. You probably have to be a databaser. There's a few of you who listen to the podcast. You know who you are. Or maybe this is one I will approach my friend Ken Massa about studying with his incredible database. Looking at the specific characteristics of horses who do well around 1 turn versus 2. I'd love to have a little more specific data in this conversation, because I feel like we've talked about it so much on the podcast, and so much of what we're saying is anecdotal. I bet there could be a way you could look at it from a statistical standpoint to see what the attributes are in terms of, you'd probably want to get into some of the Sarton type methodology about how horses distribute their energy and things like that. Specifically, Jonathon, you've talked before on the show about 1-turn dirt horses versus 2. For you, when you're thinking about 2 turns on turf versus 1 turn on turf, is there anything in particular that you're looking for to think that a horse will do better at one or the other?
No, not particularly. I don't know exactly what would do that, but I do think that it's something to consider, and I think it's probably a real thing. I think the first time I probably even became aware of it would be like Bobby's Kitten when he ran the Woodbine Mile. I was excited about that, thinking that maybe that first turn wouldn't kind of set him off where he wanted to run faster. Maybe just going straight, he would just be able to kind of settle into his stride a little bit, maybe relax a little bit. He didn't. He freaked out again. But it set him up. He had a third in that race, and it set him up for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I don't know what the particulars are about it, but I think it probably has something to do at least with the first part of the race engaging into a turn immediately rather than being able to kind of relax and have a long stretch leading into the far turn.
My gut is very similar, and similar to how I feel on dirt. The idea that early speed, when you get to go more slowly around the turn early, more horses get to lose ground and have bad trips in the 2-turn race. The 1 turn, I think my gut is that it's probably more kind to off-the-pace running styles and more kind also to galloping horses, like the point that Jonathon relayed from Nick Tamaro about Dortmund. A bigger horse often has more trouble negotiating turns. We used to joke about Dortmund as a 2-year-old and how big he was, and we made the Andy Reid punt, pass, kick joke about the physical size. That same physical size can make it a lot harder for a horse to negotiate a turn, whereas a handy horse has many fewer problems. I look at this a lot when it comes to Breeders' Cup races, looking at English racing, because over there it's so pronounced and different. You'll see horses who are just these big galloping types who want to run a straight mile or want to run farther, but with a minimum of turns. And then you'll see these other horses who can get around a place like Chester, which is basically relatively, for the UK, it's basically a bull ring. I love horses with Chester form coming to the USA. They can almost always handle the turns action. Any thought on this, Mike, before we get to our other Twitter question and bring in our special guest today?
The only thing I'll say is I've had a number of people ask or suggest to add number of turns into the formulator filters, instead of route or sprint to route and things like that, 2 turns versus 1 turn. While I think that there is something to be gleaned from horses preferring 1 turn, 2 turns, it's not quite as simple as it would sound. Because so many different tracks in the data just isn't passed through. That Gulfstream at 1 1/16 on dirt is 1 turn, but at Santa Anita, for instance, it's 2. That information isn't passed through to Equibase. And then you get questionable, what do you do with Kentucky Downs? Is that 3 turns when they go all the way around? What do you do with down the hill at Santa Anita? Is that 1.5 turns? So that's the only thing I would say. But it makes you, as a horse player, need to become aware of the track layout when, say, a horse is moving from Saratoga to Woodbine.
Yeah, that's why I thought it's more of a question for a databaser to answer, where you could look at specific configurations and find some patterns and types of horses that win. It's a shame we can't have that as a formulator filter, but it's just not practical for all the reasons that Mike pointed out. I cannot find our other. I can't find our other Twitter question. I thought we had one more for today, but before we bring in our guest, is there anything else you want to throw into the discussion today, Mike? Anybody been bothering you for stuff on Twitter that you wanted to answer in a longer form here?
No. Let's bring on Eric.
I like it. All right. So now, welcome to the show. He is a terrific horse player. He is a fantastic engineer. He is really good at math, except when he isn't. He is Hawthorne Contest Ambassador Eric Bialek. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Pete, Mike, and everybody. Thanks for having me today.
So let's just cut to the quick before we spitball a little bit with you, Eric. Tell us about the specifics of this contest happening at Hawthorne this weekend. Is it something that folks are going to want to get involved in?
Definitely. I think it's by far the best contest out there in racing. There's other ones that might have better hospitality, things like that. Hawthorne is no Santa Anita, Keeneland, things like that. But the tournament style is awesome. It's basically $400. You can bet whatever you want. Saratoga, Arlington, Del Mar, Santa Rosa, and Prairie Meadows. You can bet whatever you want. Pick fours, pick fives, doubles, pick threes, trifecta, superfecta, anything. Doesn't matter. You don't have to bet it in multiple races. Just go all in one or two races, and hopefully you get a nice price in there if you win.
Now, this contest last year on this very day was won by the other guy sitting in this apartment right now, Jonathon Kinchen. Will you be heading back to Hawthorne on Saturday to defend your title?
There's a world in which I might. It depends. You guys got to understand, this milkshake and rum thing is really good, and I'm not sure if they have those there. So it just depends if I get tired of it before then or not. I want to. I love the tournament. I love the format. I love the fact that you can kind of just do whatever you want. I was fortunate enough to win that tournament last year, but it wouldn't have worked out if it wasn't for my friend Eric Bialek scooping me up from the airport. So I got to give him a little bit of credit there. But it's a great tournament. The guys there, they really love the horse players. It's also important to remember there's no entry fee. So you're playing with your $400 that you might be playing with anyways. You might as well show up there, have a chance to get an NHC or a BCBC spot.
Eric, do you project to hang out at Hawthorne all day, or just put in your bets and go to Arlington to watch the Million?
That's a great question. Million Day, I think I'll probably just play some pick threes, pick fours, maybe a pick fives. Just a couple bets. Hopefully I can crush them, things like that, stuff I play anyway. And then just go to Arlington and watch the races. I haven't missed a Million Day in years. I'm a Chicago guy. And so hopefully I can go there, do some of that. But then Sunday is a day where I think I'm going to really get after it. Great prize pool here, and hopefully Sunday I can find some good opinions and really try to crush it. So,
Eric, a few years ago I met you when you were the youngest qualifier at the National Handicapping Championship. How's your year on the NHC Tour been going so far?
It's not bad. I've got some points here and there, but no wins. Jonathon actually beat me up for a spot. Funny story about Hawthorne one time was that Jonathon gave some guy the tip. And I don't know if the tip might have taken me out of contention there. But
nice. Good friend you are, Jonathon. Buried the poor kid.
I didn't give the guy the tip. He was sitting behind us, and he heard the tip. And we had a friend who was friendly with a trainer. I think it was Steve Asmussen. And Asmussen said that he liked both of his horses. And on the morning line, I looked at them. They're like 12-1 and 10-1. And I was like, whatever. And I just got caught up in the tournament. The horses run 1-2. The guy behind me, like 15 minutes later, he's like, hey, man, thanks a lot. I bet that exact. And that guy happened to beat Eric. So luckily, Eric let me stay at his house that night.
It wasn't for an NHC spot, but it was for like another track qualifying spot. So it would have been nice to get that. But no, I love the tournaments. Everything there is great. But I will be playing in Saratoga this Wednesday and Thursday. So maybe you'll have to come catch me there.
I did not mention the Saratoga tournament yet. I would have led with it, but for the fact that I'm surprised by this, but it sounds like they're not selling any more entries. So if you're not already in the tournament, you're in trouble for this year. So I'm soft pedaling it a little bit. But I will say for next year and beyond, I think this new format, I think these Saratoga tournaments in general are something you should obviously put on your calendar. Maybe not in terms of the money in prizes, can you consider it a major, but I think in terms of atmosphere, I think major is a fair term. Eric, why did you choose, of all the different tournaments around the country, to come to this one?
I love Saratoga. I went to school around here, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, so got some familiarity with the area. I used to come here on Mondays, catch a couple of races, and head back before I had to do back on campus. So there was days I'd be racing down the Northway, probably going a little too quick, but hey, love racing, love Saratoga, and then just the way everything falls here is perfect. Whitney Day, Pete's birthday, sale. I've never been to the sale. I actually went for the first time yesterday, and then just a good time. Got a lot of friends here, so it's always exciting to be here. Any day at Saratoga is better than a day in the office. Sorry, work, but it's true.
Let me ask you what your impressions of the sale were for a complete newbie. That must have been pretty interesting.
Yeah, I got some prices dead on too. There's the half the Songbird there, and me, Jonathon, Duke Matisse. I don't know if Pete threw a number out, but we're sitting there trying to guess who's the closest. What's the number that this horse is going to sell for? And I said 750,000. Sold for 800. Everybody else is saying over $1 million. So I think I got a good bloodstock guy here.
Perhaps a new career if this whole engineering thing doesn't work out. Mike, do you have any questions for Eric?
Well, so Eric, I got to ask. I think I know the answer, but is it a pocket protector engineer or choo-choo train engineer?
I guess you can say I do both.
He does both.
Okay.
It's actually it's actually funny because I'm an engineer who works on locomotives. So
that's awesome. So
actually, my coworker, he doesn't wear a pocket protector, but he does have pens and pencils and a little slide rule in his pocket. So a little best of both worlds. There's date. So yeah, I don't know. It's a cool job. I really like it. It helps me support my horse racing hobby.
How much do you use your engineering and math skills when it comes to your horseplay?
A lot, actually. I'm a big numbers guy. Look at a couple speed figures, then kind of watch replays for stuff. Like I watch a lot of Chicago replays when I play Arlington or Hawthorne. But I'm a big numbers guy. It's like you look at more numbers, you get a better opinion of what everybody's thinking. But there's stuff you got to realize that's not hidden in numbers, like trips sometimes. Things like horses might have bled, things like the horse is just off that day, things like that. But I'm a big numbers guy, so I've basically created some things over the years to help me kind of massage all the numbers and figure out who I think are the best horses in the race based off some factors.
Is there any equivalent in the engineering work you do to the amount that feel comes into play in horse racing, where the sort of softer factors, I think it'd be there are people who take a purely numerical approach to racing, but I think most of the best players that I know are also using some element of feel. Does that come into play at work for you, or is work just, it's all about the numbers?
I got to say work's all about the numbers because I do sound and vibration work, and we can't fudge numbers, especially with sound testing like that. Like, that is what it is. We've got ideas of how to fix things like that, but at the end of the day, it's just numbers don't lie to us. Our equipment might lie to us, but the numbers aren't lying.
And does that create any sort of tension though when you're dealing with racing, or is it just apples and oranges?
It's apples and oranges, I think. It's just racing. It's like numbers aren't always a whole story behind a race. They do paint a good picture. Back what you guys were saying about Frosty, it's just like, yeah, he freaked in the mile one on cruise control in the Whitney, but it's like, it's not like he's going to be able to run the Met Mile every day. It's just one of those occurrences, like Pete was saying, where it's just a perfect storm. He flies there, so.
I mentioned that regression to the mean concept. I mean, is that your view of a lot of so-called bounces when you're looking at numbers in horse racing, or do you think it can all be, is there another way to explain it?
So here's my theory on the bounce, is that when a lot of these guys were kind of starting to do a lot more statistical tracking of racing, everything like that, this was back in a different time in a sense, where trainers were racing horses a lot more often. A lot of these graded stakes types were running. They would run in the Whitney. Then, of course, they come back in the Woodward. It was just one of those things where they're not always getting the time off that they might have needed. It was just the older school mentality. It's like, look at Secretariat. How many times did he run as a 2-year-old? He was Horse of the Year as a 2-year-old. Horses now are kind of more kept their spots, so they can always can fire. Then you got to think that modern technology and things like that probably help trainers realize that horses might not be 100%. Think about like white blood cell counts. I don't know if that was prevalent 20 years ago. So it's just things like that might give trainers better indication if the horse is ready to go or not. But there's always going to be those performances where there's going to be performances where the horses are not running well. But I think at the end of the day, they're kind of, it's like a class level in a sense. They've got this much ability in them. Some days it'll be better, some days it'll be worse.
Mike, it sounded like you had another one for Eric.
I was just going to ask if, Eric, you talked about numbers and using numbers in your handicapping and your contest play, about speed figures and things like that. I would imagine ground loss and in trying to, like from a handicapping standpoint, do you ever do any sort of number analysis based on odds of certain types of horses and whether certain ones tend to get overbet or tend to get overlooked? Do you use that at all as a factor in your contest play?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing for me is that the more numbers I have, the better, because it paints a bigger picture. It's like, what did each of these figure makers think of their performance? I think the one thing that I've learned is that the public will bet buyers. Not everybody at the track is looking at like a Timeform US or a Thoroughgraph sheet, for example. It's a different tool than the average racetrack person has. So sometimes you might see a horse with a really high buyer figure get overbet sometimes, but it's like, then you'll see times where there's horses that aren't on the buyer scale, but it's like, look at turf racing, and turf racing is very hard to make figures for, and sometimes the best buyer always doesn't win. Turf racing is very trip oriented and flow oriented, so there's a big story right there, I think, there for just what you got to look at with all that.
Yeah, one of the things I love to do, I mean, this is obviously I do formulator and trainer stats and things. One of the things I like to do is look at the effect that certain jockeys will have with certain trainers, not necessarily whether they win a lot or whether they lose a lot or are vulnerable, but what the jockey will do to the odds. And you'll see this, especially an obvious example is Javier Castellano. If he's riding for certain trainers, yeah, they might still win 20%, but the odds on the horses will dramatically drop compared to just about any other jockey. And that's the sort of thing that I've kind of started noticing a lot more. And I think from a contest standpoint, whether or not that means that horse is not a good play or is a good play is almost a second factor. But you see it time and again where certain things, certain factors, certain jockeys will just be overbet or overvalued in the market. And from a contest standpoint, those are the kinds of things you absolutely, I would think, want to make sure you're aware of.
Yeah, especially.
Yes. Oh, you go ahead, Eric. I wanted to make a point about that as well, but let me hear what you answer first, and I'll add my 2 cents on, and I'll throw you back another question.
$2 win place formats like DRF tournaments, value is king there. You have to find those overlays of what you think is value. If you think a horse should be 5-1 and 10-1, got to play it. Sometimes when I play in $2 win place tournaments, I'll play 2 entries, one with I think the biggest overlay in the races, and one with the horse I think has the best chance to win. It's just, I don't know if theories always work. Sometimes I have split tickets, but I think in the long term, if you're really trying to find those overlays and trying to find the best horse, I think that's the best way to approach it.
You hit on exactly what I was going to ask you about, and it's sort of the difference. It's a very difficult thing in racing to understand the difference between the impact value of a statistic. And the easiest way to describe impact value is to say how often should a thing happen versus how much it actually happens. So like a jockey like Castellano, for example, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I pretty much guarantee you has a very positive impact value. The horses win more often than they're supposed to win. He has a very positive effect on your strike rate, is another way of looking at it, a higher batting average, if you will. But because it's such an easy factor to see, that doesn't necessarily translate to value in terms of your $2 ROI. Now, for me, when you're betting every day, that means you want to maybe be a little bit more selective about the spots where you land on a rider like that to make sure there's some other reason why you're getting value, maybe a bad favorite in the race, say, that's going to turn those numbers back to a positive. In the contest environment, where you have your own economy outside of the parimutuel system, in a sense, I personally would maybe give a little more credit late in a contest to a guy with a positive impact value, even if it's not necessarily a stat with a positive ROI. Eric, as a math guy, does what I'm saying make sense from a mathematical perspective?
It definitely does.
Good, that makes me feel better. We also have our hard-hitting reporter, the other member of our team. He's been quiet for a while, Jonathon Kinchen. I know he had a hard-hitting journalistic question you wanted to ask Eric before we went off the air today.
Yeah, all this math stuff is great, but I'm actually really hungry, and I was going to see where you guys wanted to go eat lunch.
All right, I see how it is.
Maybe Hattie's, some fried chicken? What do you think?
Yeah, whatever it takes.
You nixed that last night, so I don't know. You guys did run, so you guys can go do whatever you want to eat. That's the best part of exercising, is eating whatever you want afterwards.
Too bad the pod won't post in time. We can get some suggestions from the listeners, but we'll already be, hopefully, knee-deep in food by then.
Actually, I'll ask a question of the listeners based on that idea. We do have the opportunity to think about starting to broadcast pods live as we record them. Now, granted, we're having still some technical difficulties, and maybe we need to get a little bit more on firm ground before we do that. But if podcast listeners would want to tune in at 9:15 on a Tuesday and a Friday, that would be good information for us to have. If we got a push from you guys that's a good thing, we could start doing it, and then we could do many more interactions in real time, taking questions in real time, etc. Mike Hogan, what's your gut on that, whether that's a good idea or not?
Well, yeah, I think you hit on it, Pete. As long as we're able to keep the tech side of it involved, I don't see any downside to doing it as a live pod. We can do much more direct interaction with the audience, either via Twitter, via Periscope. There's a lot of ways. And I think that there's a certain segment of the audience who would find a way to tune in doing it live. And, then there's others who are always going to listen on the way home. And that's fine. I mean, we'll still do it the way we always do it. It's just a extra bonus that some people can listen live.
All right. Does anybody else have any final thoughts before we figure out this lunch situation here? We'll start with you, Mike Hogan. Anything going on?
No, not really. Just trying to hope the weather stays good. The forecast is not looking too bright for the next 4 or 5 days or so, both down here in the city and in upstate at Saratoga. But I'm hoping it's not as bad as what it might look like.
Any truth to the rumor, Mike, that you may be appearing at one of the seminars I'm doing up here at Saturdays at Ciro's and at the track?
Yeah, signs are still looking good for next Saturday. What's that, the 20th, I believe? All things. It could always blow up in my face. Things can happen up at home that keep me downstate. But as of now, everything's looking good.
We've got you penciled in, and we'll probably have to see if Mr. Flight Benefits over here can come back for that. We'll do it as a live version of the podcast. Eric, any final thoughts about the Hawthorne tournament or anything else on your mind this morning?
Well, I've got 2 of my 300 qualifications through Hawthorne. Really can say almost the third one, because the third one was on points, and I got a lot at Hawthorne. But hopefully I might have to be bugging Pete to write an article about the Hawthorne contest this weekend with my name as a headline. So we'll see.
That's a deal. You win that. We get a big plug for Hawthorne. JK.
Not excited about this news of weather, but I did just double-check the Shake Shack menu, and they do have a shake called the Sloppy Track. So I'll just switch over to that in honor of the weather and just go with the flow.
Excellent. I want to thank Mike Hogan. I want to thank Eric Bialek. I want to thank Jonathon Kinchen. And most of all, thank all of you for joining us. We will be back with another podcast on Friday. Until then, may you win all your photos. All your photos. All your photos. all your photos, all your photos, all your photos, all your photos.